The storm didn't just fall over the forest tonight, it crashed into it, like the sky itself had lost patience. The first thing the night revealed was Lyra's breath, breaking in shallow bursts as she ran. Her dress, the old faded one she'd grabbed only to spite her father, clung to her legs, torn open by clawed branches that seemed determined to slow her down. Mud splashed up her calves, cold enough to sting, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not with the sound of footsteps, heavy, unhurried, merciless, closing in behind her. Her father's voice kept echoing in her skull, louder than the thunder cracking above her. "Stay inside. Don't embarrass me tonight." He had said it calmly, like it was nothing, like it was just another one of his weekly reminders that she was a problem he'd never quite figured out how to solve. But now, out here, those words scraped at her ribs. Because she wasn't inside. And she wasn't just embarrassing him, she was running for her life. A flash of lightning tore open the sky. For the smallest moment, the world froze in white light. And in that split second, she saw them. 3 shadows slicing between the trees behind her, hunters from the rogue pack. Their eyes glowed yellow, bright as lanterns, too focused to be mistaken for ordinary wolves. They weren't following her. They were hunting her. Enjoying it. Lyra sucked in a sharp breath and forced her legs to move faster. Pain shot up her left side, hot and electric. She pressed her hand against the wound she'd been trying to ignore. Blood seeped through her fingers, warm, slick, frightening. She didn't remember when she'd been struck. Everything had happened too fast. A warning growl behind her, the snap of a twig, the sudden burn of claws raking her skin, then nothing but panic and the instinct to run. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face like a furious hand. It howled through the branches above her, echoing her heartbeat with its own wild rhythm. Every breath tasted like cold metal. Every step felt like she was crashing through the darkness with nothing but fear holding her upright. And yet, beneath all that panic, something else was happening. Her fingertips had begun to tingle. It wasn't the good kind of tingle, not the warm, comforting buzz she sometimes felt when she imagined what her life could have been. No, this was sharp, rising, dangerous. She could see faint silver sparks flickering under her skin, glowing like tiny embers. She curled her hands into fists, trying to hide it, trying to push the heat back down where it belonged. Not now. Not here. Not like this. Her power always came with consequences, chaos she couldn't control, destruction she never intended. The memory of her last slip, the one that made the pack elders look at her like a broken weapon, pressed into her mind so hard it almost stole her balance. The ground suddenly tilted beneath her feet. Her ankle twisted, and she stumbled forward with a startled gasp. She caught herself on a fallen branch, bark splintering under her fingers. Her knees hit the dirt. Her breathing turned ragged, trembling. She glanced back. The hunters were closer now, too close. Their silhouettes moved with terrifying confidence, shadows dripping off their forms like smoke. They weren't in a hurry. They knew she was slowing down. The silver sparks at her fingertips grew brighter. Lyra swallowed hard and squeezed her eyes shut. "Not now, please, not now." Her voice broke on the last word. She wasn't sure who she was begging. Herself? The storm? Whatever force cursed her bloodline with power she never asked for. She dragged herself behind a fallen trunk, pressing her back against the wet bark. The forest felt alive around her, buzzing with tension, whispering threats, holding its breath. Rain slid down her face in thin, icy streams. She pressed a trembling hand against her wound again and tried to quiet her breathing. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then a low growl rolled through the fog. Not from the hunters. No, this one was deeper. Older. Commanding. Lyra's chest tightened. She sensed him before she saw him, the shift in the air, the crackle in her blood, the instinctive jolt of fear tangled with something she didn't dare name. The fog parted slightly, like the forest itself stepped aside. And then she saw it. A silhouette, massive, towering, carved from darkness. He didn't move. He stood there, watching her. The storm raged around him, but he remained still, unbothered, like the weather wasn't brave enough to touch him. His presence alone sent a shiver through the earth, through the trees, through her bones. The hunters behind her stopped running. For the first time tonight, she heard hesitation in their steps. Even they seemed unsure about approaching the figure rising from the mist. Lyra's heart pounded so hard she felt it against the trunk. The silhouette stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough to reveal a glimpse of him as lightning slashed across the sky. Broad shoulders. A body moving with the lethal ease of something that lived at the top of the food chain. His eyes, dark, intense, amused in a way that didn't match the chaos around them, locked onto her instantly. Like he already knew exactly where she was hiding. Like he'd been waiting. The hunters growled behind her, but the sound faltered. Their confidence drained away like water leaking through cracks. The silhouette stepped closer, and this time Lyra saw more. Not just strength. Not just danger. Something in his expression, quiet fury, quiet calculation, made her pulse skip. She tried to stand, but her injured side screamed in protest. The silver sparks under her skin flashed again, brighter this time. She pressed her bloody hand into the dirt, trying to steady herself. He stepped right within her sightline now, close enough that she could see the rain sliding down his jaw, dripping off the edge of a scar she didn't recognize, but somehow felt drawn to. He didn't look at the hunters. He didn't look at the storm. He looked at her. As if she was the reason he was here. As if she was the only thing he saw. The forest held its breath. And as the storm roared overhead, Lyra realized something with a cold, dizzy certainty. Whatever was coming next. Whatever this man wanted. Whatever fate had just stepped out of the fog. It wasn't going to let her hide any longer. Not from the hunters. Not from her father. Not from the power waking under her skin. And definitely not from him. The figure stepped through the last veil of fog, and the forest seemed to shrink around him. He was tall in a way that made the trees look smaller, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he could hold back the storm with his bare hands if he wanted to. His presence pressed against the night like a second gravity, silent, heavy, impossible to ignore. Lyra's breath hitched, caught somewhere between fear and something far more dangerous. That aura, it rolled off him in waves. Not just dominance. Not just power. Something older. Something that reached beneath the skin and stirred instincts she had spent years trying to suffocate. Alpha energy, dense enough to thicken the air, magnetic enough to drag her gaze back to him every time she tried to look away. Her pulse jumped. She stumbled backward, convinced for a second that he was another hunter, maybe the worst of them. Her heart pushed against her ribs as if trying to escape her chest. She pressed a hand to the fallen trunk behind her, trying to steady herself, but her fingers trembled too badly to grip anything. Then he spoke her name. Not shouted. Not growled. Just said it, calm, certain, as if he'd been carrying it on his tongue all night. Lyra. You shouldn't be out here. The storm didn't drown his voice, it sharpened it. Made it cut right through her panic. She froze, breath suspended, because no stranger should know her name. Not out here. Not in this darkness. Not with that kind of familiarity. She opened her mouth, but no words came. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his eyes narrowing as he caught the scent of her blood. Something in him shifted, his shoulders squared, his jaw tightened, and the easy stillness he'd carried vanished. In its place came a tension that felt protective and deadly. A snap of branches behind her broke the moment. The hunters surged forward, but he didn't even look at them. His focus stayed locked on her for one heartbeat longer, enough to send heat crawling up her spine before he moved. The shift in his energy was instant. 1 second he was standing still, rain dripping from his hair and cloak. The next, he was pure violence. He met the first hunter with a force that cracked through the forest. His movements were too fast for her to follow, blurred arcs of strength, precise strikes that ended growls mid-breath. The second hunter tried to flank him, but he caught its throat with one hand and slammed it into the ground so hard the earth shook. The third barely had time to snarl before he spun and drove it back into the shadows with a single, brutal blow. It was over in moments. The forest fell silent except for the rain and Lyra's unsteady breathing. The hunters lay sprawled in the mud, unconscious or worse. The air smelled like fear that wasn't hers. He stood with his back to her for a moment, shoulders rising and falling with each breath. And then he turned. His chest heaved, rain sliding down the hard lines of his jaw. His eyes, dark and steady, met hers with a force that pinned her to the ground more effectively than the wound in her side. "I've been looking for you," he said quietly. The words sank into her like a weight she wasn't prepared to carry. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her mind raced through every impossible explanation at once, none of them making sense. Why would someone like him search for someone like her? A girl dressed in rags, hiding behind trees, trying to keep her bloodline a secret? But he kept watching her, gaze unreadable, as if waiting for her to recognize him. She didn't. Not yet. She had no way of knowing that this man, the stranger who fought like shadowed thunder, the one who said her name with disarming certainty, was the very guest her father had been preparing the house for tonight. The guest she had deliberately avoided by wearing her worst dress and slipping out before anyone noticed. The one she'd never imagined she'd meet like this. The one whose arrival was whispered about in every pack. The Alpha King. Lyra's hands trembled so badly she had to curl them into fists to keep the shaking hidden, but the effort only made her fingers sting. The silver glow trapped beneath her skin flickered in uneven pulses, like a heartbeat trying to break free. She turned her hands slightly, just enough for her to see the faint shimmer along her wrist, the mark she had spent years covering, hiding, pretending wasn't there. It glowed brighter in his presence. It always did around power, but this was different. This was recognition. The sight of it dragged her backward into memories she wished she'd buried deeper. Her father's face was always the first thing she saw in these moments. His jaw tight, eyes exhausted, mouth forming that same disappointed line he wore like armor. She remembered standing at the foot of the stairs at 12 years old, trembling after the first flare of silver fire shot from her palms, tiny, uncontrolled, enough to scorch the wooden railing. She remembered him looking at her like she had ruined something sacred just by existing. The pack had come next. A ring of startled faces circling her like she was a creature they didn't know how to name. Eyes widening at the shimmering mark, lips tightening at the sight of the burnt railing. That was the night she first heard the words whispered behind her like curses drifting through smoke. Dangerous. Unstable. Cursed bloodline. She had stood there barefoot, shaking, trying not to cry, because she'd learned early that tears only made the fire stronger. The memory shifted. Her mother. The smell of crushed herbs. A soft voice telling her to breathe gently, to hold her power like a cup of water she didn't want to spill. Then the night the fire rose without warning, hot, fierce, terrified, and her mother stepped in front of it without hesitation. One moment she was there, and the next just ashes and wind. Lyra gasped at the memory, pain spearing through her chest so sharply she pressed a hand over her heart as if she could hold the pieces in place. Her powers had come alive that night, raw and grieving. And the pack's fear grew into something colder. Something she couldn't fight. Something she didn't want to understand. She learned to swallow emotions whole. Learned to pretend she didn't feel deeply, didn't want anything, didn't hurt. Because wanting led to fire. And fire led to loss. She had sworn never to trust another alpha after that. Alphas wanted control. Stability. Predictability. She was none of those things. Every alpha she had met since her mother's death had watched her with a blend of caution and calculation, like she was a weapon they weren't sure was worth holding. But this man, this stranger standing before her with rain sliding down his throat and a presence that shook the forest, he didn't watch her like she was dangerous. He watched her like he knew she was surviving. The realization twisted inside her, tight and unwelcome. She didn't want softness. She didn't want warmth. Those things made her reckless. Made her hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing she could touch. Yet as he took a slow step toward her, eyes steady and unreadable, she felt something she had spent years burying rise to the surface, the fragile, foolish spark of wanting to be seen without being feared. She hated it. She needed it. And that truth scared her more than the hunters ever could. He said nothing for a long moment after the truth cracked open between them. Then he turned, as if sensing something deeper stirring in the forest, and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, every instinct urging distance, but something in his expression held a gravity she couldn't ignore. He wasn't commanding her. He was inviting her. And that unsettled her more than authority ever could. He moved through the trees with silent certainty, pushing aside branches coated in moonlight. She followed, pulse loud in her ears, each step tightening the strange pull in her chest. The air changed as they walked, growing denser, colder, charged with a presence older than the packlands themselves. Shadows bent toward a point ahead, as though guiding them. Then the forest opened. An ancient stone archway rose from the earth like the spine of a forgotten god, its surface etched with runes older than the oldest Alpha line. Moonlight slid across it, revealing faint silver patterns that pulsed like breathing. Lyra froze. The air hummed around her, low and resonant, vibrating through her bones. The symbols glowed the exact shade of her mark. He stepped beside her, voice dropping to something almost reverent. It reacts to bloodlines. But only one bloodline sings back to it. His throat bobbed as if swallowing uncertainty. You shouldn't be able to hear it, unless you're the one. The hum deepened. Lyra felt it first in her fingertips, then her ribs, then her throat, an invisible tether tightening, pulling her toward the archway as if her body recognized something her mind refused to name. She took a step forward without meaning to, breath catching at the sensation blooming under her skin. The world blinked. A vision slammed into her, brutal, bright, overwhelming. A woman made of living flame rose from a ring of collapsing darkness, her hair a river of shimmering silver fire. Behind her stood wolves formed from starlight, their howls shaking the sky. A crown hovered above the woman's brow, forged from heat and bone and something sacred. Voices whispered around Lyra, layered atop one another like overlapping echoes. The one with the silver flame. The catalyst. The unclaimed queen. Her knees nearly buckled. She stumbled back, chest heaving, the cold air slicing her lungs as she struggled to breathe around the impossible image. That isn't me, she whispered, voice cracking like thin glass. It can't be. But the symbols disagreed. The runes flared brighter, silver expanding in ripples that matched her heartbeat. Moonlight bent toward her, pooling at her feet. The hum shifted pitch, rising to meet her, a sound halfway between a call and a recognition. The stranger, this alpha who carried storms in his gaze, watched her as though witnessing the moment a myth stepped into flesh. There was no fear in his eyes. No calculation. Only a raw, quiet certainty that made heat creep up her spine. She wanted to look away. She couldn't. The pull grew stronger, sinking deeper into her bloodstream, threading through every fracture she had spent years hiding. Something ancient knew her, claimed her, expected her. And he stood there, breathing hard, watching her like the revelation he'd been searching for his entire life. As if destiny had finally opened its eyes and chosen her. The night held its breath until it didn't. A crack split the stillness, sharp as bone breaking. Lyra stiffened. The Alpha King's head snapped toward the trees. And then she heard it too, paws pounding the earth in synchronized fury. Not the rogue scouts. Not strangers. Something far more suffocating. Her father's pack. Shadows poured through the clearing, bristling, eyes glinting with accusation. Warriors she had grown up fearing circled the archway as though protecting the world from her touch. Their teeth bared when they caught her scent, a murmur rolling through them like a wave of disgust. She brought this here, one snarled. She's awakened something she shouldn't have, hissed another. The Alpha King stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes hardening into a warning that vibrated through the air. His presence altered the clearing, commanding, unspoken, ancient. But the pack was not looking at him. Their hatred zeroed on Lyra like a blade pressed to her throat. Then her father emerged. His clothing still formal from the gathering she had fled, but his expression, it carved deeper wounds than any enemy. Shame hollowed his gaze, The same look he used to give her when she couldn't control the sparks under her skin. Only this time it was sharper. Public. Punishing. You dare return to sacred ground with him, he spat, pointing at the Alpha King as though he were filth. You consort with a rogue, bring danger to us, and provoke ancient forces you do not understand. Lyra's throat tightened. Every instinct urged her to step back, to shrink, to become invisible the way she had learned to survive. But the hum from the altar pulsed against her spine, as if refusing to let her fade. The Alpha King moved, placing himself directly between her and the pack. His growl rolled like thunder, deep and territorial. But they advanced anyway, blades flashing, claws sliding from fingertips, the storm above them darkening as if echoing the tension. The first warrior lunged. The Alpha King met him with a speed that stole the breath from the air. Steel clashed against claws, bodies slammed into stone, shouts ripped through the clearing. The fight spiraled, raw and vicious, each strike echoing off the ancient archway. Lyra stumbled back, heart racing, power burning under her skin, too hot, too fast, too close. Panic clawed up her throat. She tried to swallow it, tried to keep it contained the way she'd taught herself all her life. But emotion was fire's trigger. A burst of silver flame erupted from her palms, uncontrolled, desperate. It struck the side of the altar, scorching a deep, smoking scar across the sacred stone. The air recoiled. Light flared. Warriors froze mid-strike, horror twisting their faces. Her father turned on her, voice slicing through the chaos like a whip. Leave. Before you destroy us all. Go, Lyra. Now. The words hit harder than any blow. Her breath fractured. Her legs moved before her mind could argue. She broke into a run once more, branches tearing at her arms, cold air burning her lungs, her vision blurring with something she refused to name. Behind her, the Alpha King stood in the ruins of the fight, chest heaving, his gaze tracking her shadow as it vanished into the trees. Duty warred with something primal in his eyes, something that pulled toward her even as the world demanded he stay. And she left him there, torn between two destinies neither of them fully understood. The forest swallowed her until her legs finally gave out. She stumbled into a shallow cave carved into the hillside, its entrance softened by creeping vines and pale moonlight. The silence inside felt gentler than the world she'd run from. She leaned against the cool stone, biting back a groan as she pressed trembling fingers to her bleeding side. The wound pulsed with every heartbeat, heat spreading through her ribs like a warning she didn't have time to heed. She tried to clean it herself, tore a strip from her torn dress, pressed it against the cut, forced steady breaths through the pain. But her hands shook too hard. Her vision dimmed at the edges. She blinked rapidly, fighting the pull of exhaustion. She needed to stay alert. Needed to stay alone. If she didn't, she'd only end up hurting someone again. A soft shift of air behind her told her she wasn't alone. She turned too fast. The cave spun. And then he stepped into the light, broad shoulders haloed by the moon, eyes fixed on her with a steadiness she couldn't read. The Alpha King. Again. As if the universe refused to let her outrun him. He didn't speak at first. Didn't accuse. Didn't reach. He simply stood there, taking in the sight of her shaking form, her blood-stained hand, her uneven breathing. His jaw tightened, anger, not at her, but at the sight of her pain. When he moved, he did so slowly, as though approaching a wounded creature he didn't want to scare. He unclasped the heavy cloak from his shoulders and held it out, letting its warmth spill toward her without forcing it against her skin. She shook her head. Too much. Too close. Too dangerous. But her strength was already fading. Her knees buckled, the cave tilting beneath her. He caught her before she hit the ground, arms strong but careful, like he was afraid of breaking the pieces she tried so hard to hold together. He eased her down onto a flat stretch of stone, the cloak drawn around her before she could protest again. His fingers brushed her side as he examined the wound. She hissed, instinctively pulling away, but he followed gently, refusing to let her slip back into the cold. "Let me," he murmured. There was no command in his voice, only concern. That alone disarmed her more than strength ever could. He cleaned the cut with a damp cloth from the small pouch tied at his hip, each movement precise, conscious, almost reverent. The heat of his hands seeped through her skin, grounding her in a way that terrified her. Then he said it quiet, like a truth he'd held too long. I couldn't stay with them. Not when they were hurting you. The confession struck deeper than the wound. Her throat tightened. She met his gaze, and for once she didn't hide the fear there, the kind born from years of betrayal, not battle. I haven't trusted anyone in a long time, she whispered. He reached for the cloth again. Their hands brushed. She stilled. He did too. Their breaths mingled in the narrow space between them, warm against cold, almost sinking. The cave felt smaller suddenly, the world outside too far away to matter. He leaned in, not demanding, not claiming, just close enough that one more breath would bridge the distance. Lyra, he whispered, voice low enough to tremble through her bones. I see you. All of you. And none of it scares me. Dawn crept over the horizon like a reluctant truth, brushing pale gold across the forest as Lyra followed him toward the distant silhouette of his palace. The night's fragile intimacy still clung to her, his hands on her skin, his voice in her ear, the warmth of his cloak around her shoulders. A part of her wanted to cling to that softness, pretend the world would grant them a moment longer. But the palace rose before them like a reminder. Reality was waiting, and it demanded payment. He told her they were going to negotiate peace, that his council would listen, that her presence beside him would show unity, not danger. His confidence almost calmed her. Almost. But the moment they stepped through the towering doors, something felt wrong. The council was already assembled, faces cold, eyes sharp, shoulders squared in a way that spoke of judgments sharpened long before she arrived. No greetings. No curiosity. Only calculation. And then she understood. Someone had told them who she was. Not just a runaway girl. Not just a wounded outcast. The silver-flamed daughter of the cursed bloodline. She felt their fear like a physical force, rippling through the marble hall, tightening jaws, flexing fingers. The whispers slithered along the walls, dangerous, unpredictable. Her mother, the prophecy. Every syllable struck her like a lash. She looked up at him, waiting for him to speak, to shield, to step into the space between her and the storm gathering behind those polished council crests. But before he could, the High Advisor raised a hand, summoning a shimmer of magic that encircled her like a cage made of light. A trial. Not formal. Not fair. One rooted not in truth but in fear. They asked her to demonstrate her power. They wanted proof of what she could control. But someone tampered with the spell. She felt it the instant she reached for her flame, an unseen hand twisting her energy, warping its rhythm, turning what should have been a small pulse of silver warmth into a chaotic burst. Sparks crackled violently along her arms, leaping out of her grasp like frightened animals. The council recoiled as though she'd attacked. She tried to steady herself, tried to breathe, tried to show them she wasn't a threat. But her power snapped again, splintering across the marble floor in jagged streaks of silver fire. Accusations flew. She cannot be allowed to live within our borders. She will burn this kingdom to ash. She is the very danger the prophecy warned us about. The hall swelled with voices, fear thickening into outrage. Her pulse thundered against her ribs. Her breath thinned. Her knees trembled. This wasn't a trial. It was a trap. Still, she searched for him. For the man who held her as if she wasn't a monster. For the alpha who whispered that he saw all of her and wasn't afraid. Their eyes met. She waited. He hesitated. A heartbeat. A single, crushing heartbeat of silence. And that silence shattered her. The betrayal hit deeper than any wound. Her chest hollowed. Her vision blurred. Every memory of last night, every soft look, every trembling breath, every fragile moment of trust collapsed into a pit of disbelief. Pain swelled inside her so violently that the silver flame ignited without permission. The floor beneath her cracked, spiderwebbing under the force of her grief. Marble dust swirled into the air like ash. Gasps echoed. Guards stepped forward. Fear swallowed the room whole. She staggered backward, choking on the taste of heartbreak. The High Advisor called for her detainment. Weapons rose. Magic flared. And she ran. Through the shattered hall. Past the guards. Down the palace steps that blurred beneath her feet. Her tears mixed with the cold morning air as she fled the place she dared to hope might become safe. Behind her, the palace loomed, beautiful, cruel, and forever stained by the moment the Alpha King chose silence over her. Lyra didn't look back. Her heart was already in ruins. Nightfall arrived like a final judgment, swallowing the kingdom in a darkness heavier than anything Lyra had ever felt. Smoke curled into the sky in thick black ribbons, and the ground trembled beneath the weight of something ancient tearing its way into the world. Shadow beasts, twisted forms with hollow eyes and teeth shaped like broken moons, poured from fissures splitting the earth. Their howls rose in a chorus of hunger, drowning out every other sound. The kingdom was losing, and its Alpha King was on his knees. He fought with everything he had, claws out, breath ragged, body battered, but the beasts kept coming. Their shadows wrapped around him like chains, dragging him closer to the fissure's mouth. Firelight flickered across his face, revealing exhaustion carved into every line. He wasn't the unshakable force she remembered. He was breaking. The palace behind him burned, towers splitting, stone glowing red, banners reduced to ash. The same halls where she'd been judged now crumbled under the weight of a truth no council member had predicted. The real threat had never been her. It had always been the darkness they allowed to grow. When the beasts lunged for the final blow, a wave of heat surged through the battlefield, sharp, searing, alive. It rolled like a heartbeat hitting the ground. Shadow creatures recoiled, screeching. And then the flames parted. Lyra stepped through them untouched. Silver fire rippled across her skin like living armor, bright enough to turn night into morning. Her hair lifted in the heat, glowing like molten threads. Every step she took melted the corrupted shadows under her feet. The girl who once hid her hands, afraid of their power, now carried an aura that rose behind her like wings, vast, luminous, phoenix-shaped. The Alpha King froze. He'd seen her spark, but never her blaze. She didn't look at him. Not yet. Her eyes were fixed on the heart of the destruction, the figure standing atop the cracked altar at the center of the courtyard, hands raised, darkness swirling around his robes. The High Seer. The puppeteer behind the prophecy. The one who twisted the kingdom's fear into power. He smiled when she appeared, a cold, victorious thing. "Child of flame," he hissed, "you return to fulfill the fate you were born for." The ground shuddered. The fissure widened. Shadows swarmed like a storm gathering around his command. Lyra raised her chin, silver fire roaring at her fingertips. 1,000 whispers surged around her, voices thick with ancient weight. Her ancestors. The same ones who once tried to silence her bloodline, now calling her forward. "Rise, child of flame." Her pulse steadied. Her fear evaporated. The seer unleashed a spear of shadow. She caught it midair, silver fire swallowing it whole. The clash shook the kingdom, fire and darkness colliding in a spiral of violent light, ripping through the sky. The heat scorched the stone. Shadows shredded under her flame. Energy crackled across her skin as she stepped closer, step by step, refusing to be pushed back. He tried to drown her power with darkness thick as tar. She burned through it. He tried to twist her mind with illusions. She shattered them with a single flare. He screamed for the night to consume her. She answered with truth. Her fire burst outward, engulfing the courtyard in a tidal wave of silver light, peeling away the seer's shadows until nothing remained but the trembling man behind them. His robes charred. His magic sputtered. His eyes widened with a fear he had once fed to the world. Lyra stood over him, fire swirling around her like a blazing storm, her voice steady as stone. "I am not your curse," she said, every word echoing through the ruins, through the smoke, through the broken kingdom that had once condemned her. "I am your reckoning." The shadows shrieked. The fissure collapsed, and the High Seer's power burned away under the brilliance of her flame. Smoke drifted across the broken courtyard in soft, wavering sheets, as if the battlefield itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. The night no longer screamed. The shadows were gone. The fissure sealed. The danger ended. But the silence that followed was anything but peaceful. In the center of the ruins, Lyra stood alone, her silver flame flickering around her in fragile, trembling waves. Not wild anymore. Not raging. Just alive. Like a heartbeat made of light. Her body wavered, exhaustion etched into her shaking shoulders. Power pulsed through her in slow, deliberate thuds, as though something ancient inside her had awakened and now refused to sleep again. The Alpha King approached her carefully, each step measured, as though he were entering the orbit of a star he did not yet understand. His hand lifted halfway, pausing in the smoky air between them. Closer than a stranger. Too far for a lover. He wanted to touch her. She could see it in the soft tension of his fingers, the ache hidden beneath the soot streaking his jaw, the longing trapped behind the fear in his eyes. But he didn't close the distance. The flame frightened him. Not the shadows she'd fought. Not the seer she'd destroyed. Not the prophecy. Her. He hesitated again, only this time, there were no council eyes watching, no advisors whispering, no kingdom forcing his hand. This hesitation belonged only to him. And that truth settled heavier on her chest than any wound. Lyra's glow wavered, dimming slightly as she took a breath. The ruin around her flickered with her pulse, cracked marble, fallen columns, scorch marks tracing her path like memories burned into stone. She looked small in the giant courtyard, and somehow impossibly vast at the same time. She didn't move toward him. She didn't step back. She simply existed, changed, powerful, unbearably alone. The Alpha King swallowed hard, jaw flexing as if fighting his own instincts. His voice barely rose above the settling ash. Lyra. But the words failed him. Maybe apologies were too late. Maybe explanations were too thin. Maybe he finally realized that loving a girl made of fire meant getting burned. And the narrator's voice, soft as a trembling leaf, deep as ancestral memory, slipped through the smoke and into the listener's ear. Would you have chosen her or feared her too? Because power always asks for courage. Because love is easy when someone is small. Because standing beside her now meant standing beside something greater than a crown, greater than a throne, greater than him. The narrator's whisper deepened, turning lyrical, haunting, intimate. Is she a hero, or just a girl cursed with too much fire? The flame around her steadied, one final surge of silver light illuminating the ruins, the king, the fallen shadows, the kingdom she had saved, and the loneliness of being more than anyone ever expected. Her breath shivered through the air. Her eyes glowed like dawn trapped behind storm clouds. Her power hummed beneath her skin, waiting for the world's decision. Waiting for his. And then, soft, inviting, magnetic, the final whisper curled into the night. If this story sparked something inside you, join our pack. Subscribe to Moonlight Desires, where every tale burns brighter than the last. The battlefield lay quiet now, a ghost of smoke curling through the shattered stones, the marble scorched, the air heavy with ash, and the scent of burned magic. Lyra walked through it, each step deliberate, boots crunching over debris, her silver flame dimmed to a soft, steady glow around her wrists. Moonlight filtered through the smoke, pale and hesitant, as if even the night was wary of her presence. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The ruins behind her were a kingdom she had both saved and been rejected by, proof of her power, proof of her exile. Her chest heaved with the rhythm of survival, heart pounding against the cage of her ribs, still trembling from the clash that had reshaped everything she thought she knew. She felt the wind catch her hair, lifting strands like whispers of a life she might have had. Her hands tingled with the echoes of silver fire, alive even when she willed it dormant. Every nerve in her body hummed with tension, anticipation, and a lingering ache that only solitude could bring. Then, faint beneath her feet, a tremor rippled through the ground. Small at first, almost imperceptible, but insistent, crawling along the stone and through the earth like a heartbeat. Lyra froze, instincts sharpening, muscles coiling as if ready to spring. Her breath hitched, nostrils flaring. The ground vibrated again, stronger, more deliberate, as though the world itself were warning her that the night's trials were far from over. She glanced upward toward the cliff that framed the horizon, and there, something moved. A shadowy figure perched on the edge, draped in darkness, perfectly still. Her vision narrowed, eyes squinting against the dim moonlight, but it was enough to sense the malice, the calculated patience, the power held in reserve. Something watched her, patient, waiting, assessing. She felt it in her bones before her eyes could confirm it. And then the wind shifted, carrying a voice, a whisper not entirely of this world, threaded with threat and promise both. It slid along the ruined walls, past her ears, curling through her hair like smoke. She is not the only one. Her pulse jumped, sudden and sharp. The words lodged in her chest like a stone. Not only her? Not only the child of flame? Questions pricked at her mind, spiking fear and curiosity in equal measure. Another power lurking in the shadows. Another reckoning waiting to unfold. A storm beyond what she had already faced, already conquered. She didn't answer. She only walked, boots scuffing stone, cloak fluttering around her like a banner of defiance. Silver flame danced faintly across her skin, whispering a quiet promise to the night. She was alive, and she was not defeated. Yet every step away from the battlefield carried the weight of prophecy unfinished, of destinies still in motion, of enemies watching and waiting. The camera of her mind, the narrator's voice slowed, deepened, curling around the tension like smoke twisting upward from a dying fire. Red eyes appeared briefly in the darkness atop the cliff, glowing with intent, piercing the night. The shape moved again, unseen, and vanished into shadow. The world held its breath. A heartbeat echoed, a low, singular pulse that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Lyra continued walking, unaware of the watchful presence, unaware of the threat gathering. Her power, her courage, her destiny, they were hers alone for now. But the wind carried a truth she could not yet touch, a warning she could not yet hear, a promise she would feel only when the moment arrived. And as the echoes of that heartbeat faded into the night, one thought lingered: this story was far from over.